Kia ora everyone. We are just going to be waiting a little longer to make sure we get some more people joining us today. And we have got Rebecca with us, so we're already got our special guest, which is great. I can see some people have started to put a note in the chat to say hi, where they're from. That's all good. Great. And Jess is going to help us admit people as they come on board. So that's great. Nice to see so many of you there today. Awesome. All right, 12:01. I think we will make a start and begin our presentation today. So I'll start with an opening karakia. Kia ino tātou, mori oho, mori tū, mori ora, kia tātou, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. So, and kia ora te whanau, no mai haere mai, ko rumataka te mona, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Natalie, aho, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to our LIANZA Te Upoko or Te Ika a Māui presentation, where we are joined by my fellow colleague Rebecca Hasty, who's going to give us a repeat presentation of a presentation she gave last year at the LIANZA Conference on exploring burnout in library staff. So we were able to view that presentation again, and then we've obviously got her in the room to be able to answer more questions, and also we can have a bit of a discussion about that topic. In terms of housekeeping, you may have realized we've got having this recorded, so just a little bit of mindfulness about what you're saying, but we would like to make this available to fellow colleagues who would like to listen in at another time. And also, if you're not speaking, having yourself on mute is very helpful, just to avoid that distraction and noise, and totally your call if you've got your video on or off, that's all good. But yes, very much would like to just now ask Rebecca to introduce and say a welcome as well.
Thank you. Kia ora e te whanau, no mai haere mai, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Pōneke te hau kāinga, ko Rebecca toku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm excited to share with you the video that I presented as part of the LIANZA Conference November last year. It is only 10 minutes long, but I felt it was the best way to sum up the research that I did for my Info 580 project. And then I thought we could have a bit of a discussion afterwards. Especially, I've been thinking a lot about this recently, because when I did this research, it was during 2020, lockdown was happening. And I think that I had an attitude of, well, we'll get through this patch and then life will go back to normal. So I've been reflecting about it, 2 years later, we're still not back to normal. So I think, yeah, it'd be quite interesting to hear how everyone's experienced these themes in our own realities as library staff working through times of crisis. That's all I've got to say about it for now. If we watch it, we can then have a chat afterwards.
Awesome. So yeah, sorry, forgot to encourage you as well. Whilst watching, if something comes to mind, if you have a question, pop that in the chat so that we can refer back to that. And depending on how you feel, we can ask that on your behalf, or you're welcome to unmute and ask the question yourself as we come to the conclusion. I'm trying that whizzy thing where I share my screen, so please bear with me. I'm hoping there's not too many other computer noises from my computer, but here we go. If we share the screen, Rebecca has sent me her presentation and I've just popped it on my desktop. So as that begins, we'll sit back and listen.
Kia ora, my name is Rebecca, and today I'm talking about the research I conducted in 2020 for my Information Studies 580 research project at Te Herenga Waka. My topic was exploring burnout in library staff during times of crisis. I want to start by talking about burnout. Burnout is often measured using the work of Dr. Christina Maslach, a social psychologist. Maslach identified 6 factors that can trigger burnout in the workplace: lack of control, poor sense of community, overwhelming workload, conflict of values, insufficient reward, and no fairness in the workplace. This diagram demonstrates Maslach's 6 factors and the symptoms and outcomes of burnout. The outcomes of burnout are detrimental not only to the individual, but also clients and the workplace as a whole. Burnout is a known factor in library work, which makes sense, as Maslach identified burnout as being higher risk in professions that involve people work. Burnout in libraries has been well researched. There is a lot of literature that I discovered that shows library staff are at high risk of burning out, and that many library staff have reached burnout in various circumstances. I became interested in libraries during times of crisis and began to explore literature around different types of libraries dealing with various crises. I was surprised to find that while there is a lot of literature covering a wide range of crises, the focus is firmly on the organizational actions taken by library management without discussing the impact of the crisis on staff. So we know that library staff have a high risk of burnout, and we know that libraries are impacted by various forms of crises. Yet what is the impact of these crises on library staff? My research questions were: how do library staff deal with burnout during times of crisis? And how can library management support staff during difficult times? The methodology that I used for this project was narrative inquiry, a qualitative method that invites people to share their stories. I conducted semi-structured interviews with 10 people located across Australasia, Great Britain, and North America. Each participant spoke about their experiences during COVID-19, and some also discussed past crises. From each interview, I wrote a short story about each person's experiences and sent it to them to edit. Those stories were included in my final research report. My analysis came from coding the data of each interview to Maslach's 6 factors, which I will now discuss. 9 out of 10 participants reported that they had experienced burnout. The first of the 6 burnout factors that I will discuss is control. I identified in library crisis literature situations where people may feel out of control. There was a lot of role ambiguity, which is when people are asked to suddenly perform tasks outside of their normal work. A lack of crisis planning came up a lot, and I think that would cause people to feel out of control. Additionally, precarious employment was a common theme in the literature, and burnout research links the lack of control felt with precarious employment to burnout. My data reflected the literature, as some participants did describe role ambiguity as their tasks shifted rapidly, and others also experienced precarious employment due to times of crisis. Something that was more common, however, was job creep, which is when, rather than roles changing suddenly, instead extra tasks are subtly added to a person's workload which they can feel underprepared for, and thus a lack of control. Another big factor that led to participants feeling out of control was the sudden shift in their workplace environment, with COVID suddenly working from home, and with natural disasters suddenly moving to a different workplace. In these situations, participants also often did not have the necessary equipment to do their jobs. For the second factor, community, relationships did not really factor in library crisis literature, as all I could find was occasional mention of patrons that could be upset. In contrast, all participants spoke a lot about their relationships with co-workers and management. A majority said they felt let down by management during the crisis, and many expressed mistrust in management due to a lack of information or misleading information shared. One participant in a management position said that they really struggled as they were not given information from their manager during the crisis and could feel that their staff were frustrated, yet they had nothing to pass along. All participants described strong relationships with co-workers, and many said they really missed their co-workers when working from home. A majority credited their co-workers with helping them survive the crisis. I will note that only 2 of my 10 participants were in management roles. The third burnout factor, workload, was the most common factor that I identified in the crisis literature, which showed how various crises can lead to increased workloads. Interestingly, this was very different from the data gathered in my interviews. While 2 participants in management roles reported feeling stressed from increased workloads, majority described a lack of work due to the crisis, despite the majority also experiencing staffing and resource reductions. Some participants reported that their tasks during the crisis were boring, menial, and pointless, and felt that they couldn't be bothered to complete the little work they had. One participant was really enjoying the additional leisure time, but most felt despondent with their low workload, yet did not want to alert management to this. I believe this could indicate bore-out, a syndrome with similar symptoms to burnout that is caused by an absence of meaningful work or mental underload. This is something that I would like to explore further in another research project, as there isn't much literature on bore-out currently. For the fourth factor, values, the literature showed an attitude that libraries are essential during times of crisis and should do whatever they can to support their communities no matter what. This could reduce the risk of burnout if this attitude aligns with an employee's values and work undertaken during the crisis provides them with a sense of purpose. Half of the participants said that they were drawn to librarianship to help people or make a difference with their work, and 4 said they had felt a calling to work in libraries. A majority of participants felt that libraries were very important during crises. However, only 2 felt that their workplace shared these views. These same 2 were the only ones who felt management cared about staff well-being during crises. 3 participants felt that the crisis had limited their ability to do meaningful work and were really struggling with feeling that they couldn't do anything useful or meaningful during a time of crisis. Some participants hoped that the crisis would be a catalyst for change and their workplaces would begin to do more meaningful work for their communities. The 5th burnout factor is reward. Crisis literature did not discuss rewarding staff, but it did show that various crises could increase financial difficulties. Financial reward was not seen to be a motivating factor for any of the participants. While many mentioned their low salaries, none credited their burnout to this. I believe that this could be because libraries are known to be a low-paying sector, so people drawn to these jobs are not overly motivated by money. Instead, the participants spoke about wanting to feel appreciated or understood by management or the public. One participant was upset as after a crisis their workplace put on a big morning tea for library patrons, but didn't do anything to thank staff. This is contrasted with another participant who spoke fondly of a team leader who threw a pizza party for staff after a crisis, showing that small gestures can go a long way. The 6th factor, fairness, was identified in the literature through many papers noting that crises tend to disproportionately impact minority peoples. Fairness factors were only identified in the data through one participant who was a member of several minority groups. This participant did not feel that they were treated unfairly during the crisis, but instead during their time in libraries more generally. They said that outside of the crisis, the existing structural injustices of their workplace and the library sector had caused them to leave librarianship for another profession. This finding is important, despite not directly relating to a crisis. Minority people's higher risk for fairness-related burnout could be compounded with crisis-related burnout factors, meaning they could reach burnout quicker. These are my suggestions for library management based on my findings. Clear communication between management and staff is vital, as is encouraging an organizational culture of support and friendship. Management should also acknowledge and reward staff for their hard work, even with little gestures such as emails or morning teas. For individuals, it is important to be aware of the risk factors for burnout so that you can identify them and seek change. You can also work to create a friendly and supportive environment with coworkers. And while this will depend on your relationship and trust in your manager, where possible, you should communicate your experiences and boundaries during a difficult time in order to ensure your workload is balanced and purposeful. Thank you very much.
Just stop the share there. I didn't see too many questions in the chat, but that's all right. Everyone must just have been very taken with your presentation, Rebecca. That was really great. Thank you. sorry, I very much like just miss my co-workers. So yeah, it's just hard, you know, having to work at a time when we're sort of half of us are in the office and half of us aren't. And that's just the way we're rotating our workflow at the moment. So a lot of those things from a couple of years ago still seem to resonate now for us. So yeah, so a few comments there now, sorry to say, yeah, interesting. Thank you, Rebecca. And thanks. So maybe just over to you with a few more things that might have come to mind as well, or things you want to ask our community.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely the strongest finding that I found is, yeah, all of my participants that I spoke to were really, really strong on how much they value their co-workers, how much they miss being with their co-workers, and how, yeah, checking in on each other throughout various types of crises went such a long way. And so it is, I think, really important for us to remember that when we're not directly working with each other, like at the moment in my workplace, we are taking turns in different shifts of being at home and being in the office. And it's, yeah, good for me to remember as well that just sending someone something interesting in the news and having a bit of a casual conversation with them, it doesn't always have to be direct work-related emails, because still building that community can go such a long way to helping with the isolation or just the general drudgery that, you know, plodding through this crisis can feel like. I was wondering if anyone else had any observations of maybe some issues related more to you in the beginning of 2020 pandemic versus how you're feeling now. Has anyone's experience shifted, or perhaps their burnout factors have shifted in our experiences over these past 2 years?
Can I just jump in? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Justin. I work currently at Upper Hutt Libraries, but before this I was working at Lower Hutt there, and I've worked in the sort of technical support sector in libraries for a few years now. Initially, when we had that first run on the working from home isolation aspect of it, there was a lot of stuff that I came to recognize as burnout that was only apparent because we were suddenly away from work. And I've since talked a lot about that with staff here at my new job, is that I didn't recognize a lot of factors until I stopped. Rebecca, did you get that from anyone else, or have you seen that resonate in other people when they took that break, that suddenly they felt more burnt out or more likely to feel that way than beforehand?
That was the experience of one of my participants who was in a management position. They said that it wasn't until the crises hit that they realized that they did need more support from management above them, and that the demands of their staff, you know, coming up to them, that it was all just hitting breaking point. And they thought, well, the crisis sped it up, but this would have happened to me eventually, because I can see now that I was treading water, essentially. So I thought that was quite interesting, that, yeah, the absence of the humdrum of everyday life and just being at work did seem to bring some things to hand. But yeah, thank you for sharing your experience, Justin. That's really interesting. Have you been able to work through the burnout?
Oh yeah, it's tricky. It comes and goes, you know. I mean, especially we've just decided to split our workplace into 2 separate teams, and I work the first half of the week, and the other team works the second half of the week. And I think a lot of it for and especially library staff is, often I find with library people that you'll go a long way to prove how much your work is valuable, and often not give yourself a break because of that. Like, you'll do a lot of work and be like, oh, I'm doing all this stuff and things like that, and and then when you stop, or you have to, you know, work slows down or things like that, you can find it difficult to find value in your role. Whereas I think now I'm just trying to more take a break and say, you know, I'm here for people, I'm here for staff in our community, and I'm, you know, able to have, you know, that has value too. Whereas beforehand, I felt if I wasn't meeting my own personal mysterious set of KPIs that kept changing every 5 minutes, then I was going to somehow ruin everything and and, you know. Whereas now I'm more focused on just, you know, a single project and how I can change that over, you know, during work from home time and things like that. So I've tried to slow down because of that. And I think that's one thing that's come from that I'm trying to help rectify. But definitely, like the first month I was here, I've only been here 7 months, and the first month I was here, it hit me so hard how much I felt, you know, physically I could, you know, it was only when I started to slow down that I realized how much I felt that way. But yeah, it's, you know, it is what it is. I see people saying thank you for your honesty, but I mean, it's just, you know, I think we all know this stuff as we work in libraries. You know, we all know what it's like. It's a lot. It can be, to value yourself and to value your work is a tricky proposition sometimes.
Thank you, Justin. That actually touches on something that I found really fascinating when I was doing my lit review, and that was this phenomenon called vocational awe. And it was described by an American librarian. I've got my notes here, but I've only written down her surname, which is Ettarh, so Ettarh. And I'd really recommend reading her piece on vocational awe, because it describes essentially almost mythologizing of the role of the library and saying, well, we are in this profession where we do so much to help people, we're such pillars of the community. But when that becomes something that people place so much of their stake and their identity into, then they can push themselves, like Justin mentioned, to these KPIs that they've come up with themselves for, I need to do all of this. And that can really encourage burnout, because we're pushing ourselves beyond where we naturally should be. Vocational awe, Laura. And yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting phenomenon. And this piece goes all the way back into the library as almost a holy place with beautiful architecture, and it's a hallowed space where you can come for quiet and the librarian knows all. But that's a lot to carry when you are that staff member. So I'm not doing a great job of summing it up, but I'd really encourage anyone who can relate to that to have a look at vocational awe. I'll just put the author in the chat. So 2018 vocational awe. So yeah, thank you, Justin. I'm just going through the chat, and Catherine has her hand up. If you'd like to speak, please, Catherine.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Yeah, I just picked up on something that Justin said around that was relevant for me, and it was probably more into the second shutdown in 2020, when I had actually, was it 2020 or last year? I'm not sure. I had taken some annual leave and really needed it. Was in, you know, getting quite tired, and we went into shutdown on my second day of annual leave. And it's really interesting. I thought, you know, I'd take this leave and I'll come back refreshed, but then like 3 weeks later rather than 1 week, I was actually really quite drained. And so yeah, that's just an interesting observation. I guess though, I found that I could keep myself relatively buoyant throughout these times by connecting with quite a lot of professional development, and in particular sort of like sessions like this that LIANZA and TELSIG were running. So go LIANZA and TELSIG, little plug for you. And like, there is so much available online. I just think, I can't say I got burnt out, but they really did help me. And I guess too, I'm relatively extrovert, so I needed that. I can identify that in myself. I don't suppose that's an area that you looked at, is it, Rebecca? You know, introversion, extroversion.
I didn't know, which would be really interesting to match my findings against how people self-report their personality types. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that about professional development, because I think that's really key. One of my participants felt really just stuck and frustrated because when they returned from a crisis, their workplace was in, you know, crisis mode, everyone all hands on deck. And the work that they were doing was more of quite basic library administration type things, whereas they were really keen to keep progressing their career as a professional librarian. And they found that quite frustrating to not be doing that more skilled work and to not have professional development opportunities for a year or so. And that was something that, yeah, they said they found the most difficult. was not having room for growth. And so it's really cool that you were able to build community and keep working towards a goal. And that could be something that helps you avoid burnout. That's really cool. And a good reminder for all of us to, attend things like these LIANZA chats. I think they're a really great way to not only stay connected, but help us keep our eyes on our career goals.
And I just wanted to say a plug for the fact that we're very fortunate to have you here and available to share this with us, because some of you might not know, but Rebecca's about to head off to greener pastures, and with the electronic world, I really hope that we can keep connected, Rebecca, and keep learning from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so relieved to be in today's day and age where we can keep in touch so easily and share my experiences. Yeah, you say greener pastures, but I think for me it will be drier sands. But for those of you who don't know, I've taken a job recently in the UAE, so I'll be moving over there in about a month, which is scary but exciting. But yeah, really keen to keep these professional connections going. Thinking of hands up, we have Melanie Brebner, if you'd like to chat.
Hi there. I found you're talking about that sort of pressure point between management, and I felt that in the first lockdown particularly, you had the management requests coming down for continually having to update pandemic plans and contingency plans, and things would turn on a dime because you thought one thing one day and then the local government guidelines would come down and then you'd change things the next day. And then from underneath, and this was a personality thing, so Catherine was talking about introversion and extroversion, but I felt this was the judgment versus J and P. What's the P? Whatever it is. So that the people who were the J's seemed to find it quite difficult because they like that structure. And I'm one of those people too, and I like that structure. And there were times when I would have to say, well, it's just changed. You know, we've got the local government guidelines, and yes, yesterday we thought we were going to do click and collect, and today we've been told no, we can't. And they were struggling to understand it, and it was coming back up at me, and I found that quite hard. And one of the areas that I felt I needed to grow as a leader was trying to cope with that, those different opinions that everyone had about how things should go when you're being told, you know, you can take everything that your team say up to the management, and then you get told what's going to happen. That comes down from not just from your managers, but from local government and further up as well. So there was a lot of time where I felt a sense of powerlessness, because I knew how I wanted things to go. I knew how my team wanted things to go, and they wouldn't necessarily go that way. And I do think there was a personality difference in how people coped with that time of crisis. But I think now it's that you think of a time of crisis as a particular short-winded period of time, as Rebecca said, when you get over it and then we're all going to get back on with our normal lives. And here we are, you know, on the edge of another surge probably, and wondering how, okay, we're now all working in little bubbles, and if this team's sick, will this one be able to come in and step in, and, you know, are we going to open the libraries for half a day in one area and half a day at the other, or are we going to have alternate days? And they're questions that we can't necessarily answer till we see exactly if any of us get sick, or how sick we are, whether we can still work, whether we're, you know, what obviously if we're sick, you have to stay at home these days. But, you know, there's all those things that we can't actually define anymore and we can't control, but we have to be prepared for them. So I think for my team, although we're not at that actual crisis emergency point, we are still planning for it continually and having to adapt as new information comes to light. And I do think there are some personality types that cope with that better than others. So did you again have a look at any of that sort of stuff in the literature? Did that sort of personality thing come out at all?
That's really interesting that you asked that. And actually, yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. It sounds like your experience were very, very similar to one of my participants who was trapped from, you know, the demands from below and lack of information or lack of support from above. And yeah, that person found it so difficult. And I really, yeah, I've never worked in management. And so it was a good reminder for me to, you know, cut the people above me some slack, because we're all people working under crisis, doing the best that we can. In terms of personality types, the only time that came up in the literature, again, I found my literature of libraries in crisis, they really didn't focus on library staff experiences at all. Everything was very focused on how clients were finding it. But I did some work into looking at emotional labor before my topic kind of spiraled into what it is now. And emotional labor literature discusses different personality types quite a lot. And that's basically that some people can withstand a lot more than others because maybe they're a bit more extroverted, or they can remove themselves from a situation and say, well, this is just a workplace interaction and my true, I don't know, sense of self is over here outside of the workplace. But it's interesting it doesn't come through more, especially with the burnout research, because you're right, what could be a breaking point factor for one person might be so different for someone else, depending on so many factors in their life. So that's a really good one. I think, yeah, the control factor is something I've seen a lot, and that's feeling lack of control, whether that's because you're not receiving information that you need, you don't have equipment that you need. But that seems to be quite a universal one that everyone, I mean, of course you would, feeling out of control and trying to make it through a crisis is really, really difficult. And that is one that sometimes does need to come from management or come from external factors to mitigate that risk. Bit of a ramble there, but yeah, thank you for sharing, Melanie. Really, really interesting stuff. And I'm sorry to hear that you were in a tough place there. That sounds really hard.
Well, I guess it's just part of a course, you know, when you take on a leadership role, but we don't all expect, you know, once in 100 year.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for me, it was more, cut yourself some slack and just try and pacify people as much as possible at both sides, because you can't do everything at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel, with a beautiful cat as your picture, you've got your hand up.
Kia ora. I'm based in Christchurch, so I was wondering if any of your participants may have had experiences with ongoing issues of crisis. For example, we had the quakes, then we had the quakes, then we had the quakes, then we had the mosque shooting, and now we've got COVID. And a lot of the methods that are put in place to keep people safe are the same that we experienced during the quakes. And I was wondering if an ongoing rapidity of crises had any impact on the amount of burnout people were noticing.
Yeah, so I don't want to give away anyone's details too much. I'll keep it very, very vague. But I did speak to people from all over the world, and I'd say perhaps half, or maybe not quite half, of the participants had experienced repeat crises in the past of various varieties. And then, of course, everyone experienced COVID. And that was interesting to see people contrast how this crisis was handled and lessons learned that they could carry into the next one. Lost my train of thought there a little bit. So what was the second half of your question, Rachel?
I just wanted to know if there was anything that having multiple episodes of crises had a higher percentage of burnout, or if there were any correlations with that and how people could manage it.
I did find that so 9 out of 10 of my participants said that they had experienced burnout. I didn't clarify whether it was in the past or at the moment with COVID. So I think that we can make a generalization there that experience with past ones doesn't seem to make you more prepared, or I guess increase your risk of burnout, as sadly, basically everyone had experienced it. I did find though that some people were able to contrast what they liked about, say, how their management dealt with the past crises versus how their current management were dealing with the one they were in at the moment. And so that was interesting to me, for someone to say, this worked really well for me when a natural disaster happened. Like, one person had a really dynamic manager who was showing that they would pitch in and help people with practical things that needed to be done in the library while a natural disaster had struck, versus their current manager was very hands-off and would let the staff get on with the nitty-gritty of it. And then some people as well, I think because no one had experienced anything like a pandemic before, so that was the unknown, whereas natural disasters or budget cuts, financial crises that other people had experienced before, there was that end in sight with those. Whereas something I could see with the pandemic was the uncertainty of when is this going to end. Yeah. I think I've rambled a wee bit there, but it's such a hard thing to say. And there's so much more work that I'd love to do in this area because these are great questions.
Thank you anyway. Sorry, I'm note taker for my team, so I thought I'd ask the question that they'd probably want.
That's a really good question. Thank you, Rachel.
Have we got anyone else out there who's brave enough to raise an issue or to ask Rebecca something as well?
You could pop it in the chat. I'm happy to read out a question in the chat if you don't want to get on the microphone.
I liked how you sort of came up with that word bore out too. I was thinking, oh gosh. Yeah.
So yeah, bore out, that was one of my biggest findings in my research that I'd love to do more work into. It's a term that doesn't have much academic literature about it yet. There's a quite skinny book that's been published by 2 researchers who were looking into office jobs and all the rest. But yeah, it's just the trudging monotony of not really doing anything. But then at the same time, so many people don't want to change it. It's really hard to want to alert your manager to the fact you're not doing anything. Some of my participants, it was because they were worried they would lose their jobs. Things were so precarious. They said, well, if it's no one, I'm sitting here all day, moving my mouse to stay active, that's not going to look good for me. Other people knew that they had job security, but just couldn't bring themselves to even do the tasks they needed to do. And that was really interesting to me. Rachel Essen, you've got your hand up.
Kia ora, thank you. I found this very interesting. And one question and one kind of reflection. I attended a session of national librarians from all around the world last year, and the common theme was the range of really tough issues that they were facing, from the bushfires in Australia to earthquakes, pandemic, all political unrest, all of those sorts of things, which was quite extraordinary. But my question is about that when you're in a leadership role and you're setting an example, I think it's important to set that example of looking after yourself, because that is part of resilience and part of hopefully avoiding burnout. At the same time, you're aware that staff are looking to you and kind of your leadership and the work that you're doing. So you're having to try and balance that, being seen to be doing the mahi and also the taking care of yourself. Any advice or any insight on how to achieve that balance?
It's a great question. I think, it's one that I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer, being that I've never experienced being in a management role. But I do think that, the balance of taking care of yourself, but then also being there for others, I think it would just be to really acknowledge what you can and can't do that day. And the big thing that I found, because again, most of my participants were not in management positions, and so it would have been interesting to have more of a balance, but it wasn't the way that it went. But I think most people really, they liked their managers as people and they could feel sympathy for them going through such a difficult time. But they just really wanted more transparent communication. So for a manager to answer their question by saying, I don't know, I haven't been given the information, I'll let you know, when I can find out something, but for now, I'm sorry, I have no idea, I'm trying my best. Some people really felt that they were just stonewalled from their management, and they found that really frustrating to have an email go unread or to have a really vague answer. So I guess just, that community building as well, reminding everyone, no matter what your position is, that we're all people trying to get through a tough time. We're people first and co-workers second. And yeah, definitely self-care. I think leading by example and even telling your team, hey, you know, today I don't have the information that I need and it's all a little bit overwhelming. I'm going to take a half day of leave. It's hard for me to say, I think, being that I haven't been in that position myself. So don't feel like I can give an experienced answer, more of a guess from where I am and what I heard from my participants who also were not in management roles.
Maybe there is someone else out there who might be able to give a reply to that as well, how they've found things. I'm kind of interested. I've just moved into a team leader role, so I'm thinking, you know, how do you keep that connectedness, but also make sure, that you don't burn out and that people are still looked after and feel, supported in their roles. Not expecting Rebecca to answer. Is there someone else out there who can give a perspective there? Sort of harder to tap someone on the shoulder. There we go. Amy might be able to, or she might have a question. Please go ahead, Amy.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. No, I just wanted to say that it's one thing that was really important for me as a middle manager was understanding that no matter what I did, someone on the team wouldn't like it. And just having to give that away, particularly if you have a big team, or if you're, say, managing a small library and you're responsible for, ultimately responsible for 20 to 30 people, you've just got to say, as you said, everybody brings a different personality. Some people are going to be at the far ends of those spectrums, are only going to want very structured information and are going to panic when they don't get it, and at the other end are going to be very comfortable with just being told that things are fluid and we'll find out tomorrow or maybe the day afterwards. And so just trying to walk a middle road and understanding that people at either end might need a little bit more support, but they're probably, ultimately I think that you can really damage yourself by trying to help everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I really agree that I think taking care of yourself and encouraging things like mental health days, as Laura's just said in the chat, I think that's really, really important. I can see in the chat as well that Marion Reid would like to comment. Are you there, Marion?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I'll put my video on so you see that I'm a real person. I just wanted to comment on Rachel's discussion and just to relate an experience I had some years ago when I was in a role we were going through a major restructure, and it was actually the Auckland amalgamation, so you can imagine what that was like. As I was a group manager for one of the councils there, and I had senior staff reporting to me. And what I found is I spent a lot of time supporting them and getting them, trying to support their needs and what have you. But I came to a point where I had just dealt with one person who was very emotional, and she sort of left. It was quite late in the evening, and I just went into my office and virtually, burst into tears. And because I was going through the same thing as what they were, I didn't know whether I had a job or not. It was, but I was so busy giving that I wasn't taking care of myself. But what I did learn from that experience is that if you're in that situation, you need to find somebody that can be there for you as well. So it's not only looking after yourself, that's extremely important, but also make sure you've got somebody that can be there for you as well, so that you can download on them, so to speak, and help them, help you through that process. And that's what I didn't have at that time. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing, Marion. And that's so true, that the strongest thing I found was community. People, community, having someone to vent to, having someone there for you is, the strongest thing. And I think it is really good for us who aren't in management positions to remember that our managers are people. And even though we can, they're there to look after us and, we can vent about what's going on in the workplace to them, they are people also going through a difficult time. So that was a good reminder for me when I did this research, hearing that first-hand experience of the two participants who were management. So I think we've probably got time for maybe, should we say, two more people? But thank you everyone for being so open and sharing with us as a community together. Really, really value this. Would anyone else?
Yeah. Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask if you'd like to, or just make a comment how you're finding.
I have a comment, Natalie.
Great, Leah. Hi.
Sorry.
Great.
Just kind of following on, I think just another thing as a leader, like again from my past experience years ago, is maybe honesty on how you're handling the situation with your team. I was a new manager and I was in a very difficult position, but didn't really tell the team, I think, how clearly it was a hard situation for myself, and then followed up years later when I was no longer that organization with some of the team, and kind of talked about it then at that point, and they didn't realize it was so hard on me. And so I think overall, I think that back and forth, you learning from your team members if they're having a hard time, but being able to share with them as well equally that you're having a hard time is probably a great way to get through a crisis all together and be support.
Yeah, thank you so much. That really is the common thread I found from my participants who were management, is feeling, one person in particular really did not want their team to know how they were feeling because they were quite new to it and wanted to present, as a strong leader. But then ultimately when they found themselves burning out, were unable to continue in that position, they realized, talking to their former staff members as people, that it wouldn't have been so terrible for them to know that they were having a tough time. We've got two hands up. I think Susie, yours was up first, and then we'll hear from Ginger, and that might bring us to 1 o'clock, I think. But Susie, the floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou. You have to excuse the noise at my place because my dog's having a mental about something and I'm sitting outside. So I work for Auckland Libraries, or I worked for Auckland Libraries. I've actually changed roles just very recently, somewhat as a result of my own burnout. Just kind of got to a point where I needed to go and do something entirely different. But one of the things that I feel my team struggled with, and I was one of 3 leaders of a team of 60, was staffing. We had a whole period of time over 2 years. Our recruiting has been incredibly patchy. Then we've had people out because they were vulnerable. We're keeping people safe so they're not at work. And, we've now got a vaccine mandate that's exacerbated that again, along with people leaving the profession because they also have come to that point of burnout. And I think that kind of needs to be really sort of acknowledged and recognised, that, you talk about workloads expanding and creep, and there's definitely creep in that space, but there's also just flat out not enough people to do the job some days. And it's just something that I kind of want to, I guess put my hand up and say, this is a problem. This is something that we as a profession need to deal with. We need to advocate for a really great staffing model so that we are looking after our staff and their well-being. And some of that's about simply having enough people to do the job. So that's me. Thanks.
Absolutely, Susie. And that is one of the classic factors of burnout. Before Christina Maslach did this research, it was well known that too much work, not enough people equals burnt out staff. I've got a little shoulder tap here from Natalie to let you all know that Telsig's next topic is recruitment and assorted challenges. So that
Yeah.
sounds like that's going to be a great one.
Yeah,
For you.
I'm just about to send LIANZA the details to say that's our next topic. Recruitment is such a big thing. So look out for that, 24th of February, guys. I'm just about to send out, and we've got some panelists to talk about it. It's such an issue. So you're so on the button there, Susie. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, Susie. And kia ora, Ginger.
Kia ora from the United States. I just will reiterate that what you're talking about is definitely very universal. We here in the U.S. are also experiencing, these feelings of burnout. So this is, it's interesting to hear that, globally we really are feeling this impact. But what my question is a lot of the librarians I've been speaking with have really been struggling with this sense of purpose. And I'm wondering just how much that's been exacerbated through the pandemic, or if this was just an underlying issue throughout librarianship and in libraries outside of the course of these lockdowns.
Thank you, Ginger. Yeah, that actually makes me think of one of my participants from the UK who was feeling a bit despondent before the pandemic purely because of all of the I haven't been following it too closely, but you might be aware with the UK library budget cuts and, all of that public funded money. There's been huge staffing reductions over there prior to the pandemic. And this person felt, well, I really value this work, but it's so hard when, it's been made pretty obvious that the government doesn't, or that, we don't get the use from the public that we should. And then, they felt during the pandemic as well, they weren't able to do work that was meaningful. And that was a word they used a lot, was I want to do something meaningful instead of this nothing work that I've been told to preoccupy myself with. Actually, another participant who was not from the UK said, day-to-day work, I can normally do things where I really see, they were in an academic library with my students, I can really see that I have a direct benefit to them. And now with the lockdown, I'm doing bullshit work, was how they described it a few times. And I think that, that's so true. There's, of the burnout factors, I think value, again, comes into it, where people find their motivation and can push through the burnout when they feel that all their hard work has been channeled into something that aligns with their own personal sense of values. And that's, I think, one for management to be aware of, is even when our workloads shift, or even when the things that we're doing can't be the same as they would be day to day, to make sure that staff still can see the wider purpose in what they're doing, how it plugs into the library's general mission to provide value to our clients, to ourselves, to our communities, because that can really keep people strong, as feeling I'm doing something purposeful. It's a really good comment there. Thank you. So we are almost at 1 o'clock. I think I could take another question if anyone has one, or any other chats. I'm really enjoying, this open dialogue here.
It's been really good. Yeah. Anyone else? Otherwise, we can call it time if we'd like to. Yeah, as I say, we're very lucky to have Rebecca for the time that we have today, in terms of her progressing her career and moving overseas. So being snapped up by another library, but she's staying with libraries. So that's, we'll let her go, but that's been awesome. And I just think the discussion that we've had today does show how we can support each other, how we can learn from each other, and really just to support each other. Kia kaha everyone out there doing the hard yards in libraries. It's going to be a bit tricky from here on in, I think, just trying to do what we need to do, but we will have more sessions, and so I would encourage you to be part of those, or at least I did see a little bit of prompting in the chat too about trying to get LIANZA maybe to give us some more channels to have those discussions as well. So that's important. So just thank you so much, Rebecca, and I will say our closing karakia, which is whakanoa e tēnei wahi, whakanoa e tēnei korero, whakanoa e tēnei tangata, humie, huie, taiki e. Thanks everybody, and I'll press stop on the recording.